And then Stephen, I believe you can just share your screen or do whatever you want. I don't think I need to give you any special permissions.
Okay, let me try that really quickly. I've got a 2-monitor setup and I've never used a 2-monitor setup with this laptop before. This is my dev laptop. So let me see. Oh, okay. Looks like I can actually do it. So you guys should be seeing a screen now. Yeah.
Yep. Yep, we do.
Okay. Let me know when you want me to get going.
All right, we're all set. Why don't you just start by introducing yourself for a sec, and then we'll jump into the RapidMiner.
Yeah, sure. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Stephen Fouskarinis. I started my life off as a C++ programmer kind of thing, and then since that, I've kind of moved into more sort of managerial positions where I've managed larger and larger teams kind of thing, but always in the technology field, and the last decade in healthcare technology. And through all of that, always, there's always been a ton of data analysis, data engineering, pipelines, ETL, all that sort of stuff. Sort of thing. But in the last few years, like everybody else, I've kind of become more interested in how do you get more out of the data? And that's where sort of AI comes into it. So that's me really quickly. Today, I'm going to go over one of the tools that I was introduced to probably a decade ago, that I was originally introduced to it when I was doing a predictive analytics course at UCSD. And it was sold as being a tool where you didn't really need to know how to program. So a no-code or a low-code platform, basically, that still allowed you to do AI sort of thing. I've continued using it since then, and it's certainly sort of has grown since then, sort of thing. And this, overview is really just about how my opinions about it, sort of thing. So to that end, I do want to say up front that I'm not an expert in RapidMiner. And that what I'm going to present to you guys here is very much, tainted by how I've used it and how I continue to use it, sort of thing, right? So, and also to that point, if you guys look on Slack, I sent out a copy of these slides probably 30 minutes ago or so, sort of thing, so that you can follow along. I'm not really intending on reading my slides, with maybe a couple of exceptions, sort of thing. The idea is I'll kind of let you know what slide I'm on, but I'm going to try and spend most of my time actually showing you things and showing you how, at least how I do things, etc. So that makes sense to everybody? Cool. Okay, so what is today's agenda? So again, who is this for? I'm going to give you a quick overview of the platform itself. And I'm going to go through the capabilities. And now, as I'm going through the capabilities, I'm actually going to show you, and that's where I kind of want you to have the slides, if you like, from Slack off to one side. And I'm just going to be talking through, how to do, what the different capabilities are and how to do it. I've got a separate bullet point here for the demo, but I'm actually going to be demoing as we're going along and showing you some of these capabilities. I won't be showing you everything. Obviously, it's just way too much. But that's where I'm going to be demonstrating throughout. And at the very end, we can do some questions and answers. Okay, so let's start off with who is the target audience? Well, supposedly it's everybody. As I said, I was introduced to it when I was doing a predictive analytics course back at UCSD. And the idea was they wanted to introduce people to the concepts of machine learning without necessarily them knowing how to code, sort of thing. Now, by the end of that course, you were expected to be able to code. At that point, it was in R, not Python. Python hadn't quite gotten the traction that it has today. So definitely it's geared towards people who don't necessarily code or have very rudimentary coding skills, right? So that's the whole idea. So you might be a domain expert, or some, or an analyst or something like that, but you don't necessarily know how to code. Now, in theory, and this is where I have less experience with it, it's also supposedly geared towards data engineers and data scientists, right? So the idea, that's why I, sort of emphasize the fact that it's supposedly it's for everybody. The idea is that even really advanced practitioners can still use this tool. However, whether you are an advanced practitioner or a domain expert that doesn't have much coding background, you still have to understand some some basic concepts of like, how do you build a machine learning structure, pipeline, basically, the structure of a pipeline. You still have to understand the idea of separating your data into training and validation data sets. You still have to understand, how am I going to, what are the performance metrics for the particular model that I'm applying? So you don't completely get off scot-free. So that's where I think it gets a little bit oversold. And again, this is my opinion now, in that, oh, anyone can do data science. Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, if you're really just going to play around with data, probably Tableau is a better tool, right? Just to visualize it and muck around with it, sort of thing. Okay, so let me give you a platform overview. I'm going to look at this slide, then I'm going to switch over after this slide. So it's basically, the platform itself is split into two large areas of components. One is the RapidMiner Studio itself, which is the local IDE that you would install on your machine where you can then do things, right? So within that, it has, and actually let me switch over as I'm speaking and I can show you. So this is the local, right? The IDE, and all I've done is I've started it up. So this is how it starts up. It allows you to create, this initial screen to basically sort of, create a blank process or kind of get you started, sort of direct you to whatever task you want to do. As I said, look at the slides while I'm talking about this, but basically there's a designer. So this is the area where you would drag and drop different visual components to basically create your pipeline, right? Your machine learning process. There's a results tab, which basically shows you the results of the thing that you're running, the process that you're building. There's the turbo prep tab, and that's where you prepare the data, and we'll get to that in a second. There's the auto model. So that's the AUTOML stuff, right? Where basically I can give it some data and say, go and apply a bunch of different models and you tell me, show me, what the results are from those different models. And that to me is probably one of the more powerful features that it has. Now, again, years ago, it was a little bit on the unique side. Now, pretty much every platform does that. And the last piece is the deployment. So if you do have a process that you like, maybe from the AUTOML, you can just kind of deploy it and then manage it as a deployment. And that deployment can be local or it can be remote. So that then brings me to the other piece. And I'm going to, for this, I have to switch back to my slides. So the other piece is basically the server or the remote piece, right? So that can be something that you install yourself on your own machine, or it can be something that you provision in the cloud, right? On AWS or Microsoft Azure or something like that. And it basically is composed of a number of components. The first one being the RapidMiner server itself, which allows you to basically be able to execute some of these processes on the server. That allows you to do two things. You can scale vertically, you can scale horizontally. Vertically being that I can just have a beefier machine up in the cloud, for example, or on another server that could run, and train these models faster. Or I can then split it out, horizontally, where I can have multiple processes running at the same time for deployments, for scoring, for example, or for training models, etc. It also comes with a tool called Grafana, which is a dashboarding tool, which I'm just going to very briefly show you at the end. I'm not really going to do much more than that. It comes with the web app designer. So that's another component for building very, very, very rudimentary kind of web pages with components that can then talk to the data that is being produced from the RapidMiner server. It has a Jupyter Hub built into it. So for Jupyter Hub Lab, basically, is what it is. And then it also has an extension, which I have not played with, but I just am aware of it, for real-time scoring. So the idea is that you can send it data and then it can basically score that data, give you basically a prediction on that data, which we're going to touch on a tiny bit, but not in terms of this real-time scoring, just to show you how you can use web services. Okay, so let's talk about the capabilities of the Studio tool itself, which is what we're going to focus on for the next few slides, right? So it allows you to do things like visualize the data. So one of the main components that I talked about was, let me switch to it, was this Turbo Prep, right? So what Turbo Prep allows you to do is it allows you to sort of visualize data, manipulate it, kind of prepare it, right? So it's data preparation is basically what it is. And so to that end, I will show you how to do some of that, right? So again, my intention for this was to make it as sort of hands-on and interactive as possible. So the first thing you do is you need to load some data. And you start off by basically importing the data. As you can see, I've done this a number of times. So I'm going to grab it from my directory. I'm not going to be there.
Hey, Stephen, is there a way to maybe make your screen a little bigger?
I don't know. That's a good question.
One potential option is lowering the resolution, and that'll just kind of naturally do that, if that's an option.
Try that. Yeah, I'll try it on this screen really quickly. Make sure I'm doing the right one.
Can you use Control-Shift+ like it is works
I
as
don't
browser?
Yeah, it's a good idea. Let me try that first, but I really don't think that that is going to work with RapidMiner. RapidMiner is not that well integrated into Windows.
Also, I think on Zoom, there's a view option. Maya, do you want to try to see if you can expand on that Zoom ratio?
So each one of you guys, yes, you can do your own zooming in and zooming out. Sorry, window.
I think when I do that, yeah, it's expanding the size of what Stephen is showing.
Yep. So do you still want me to try lowering the resolution, or do people want to try adjusting their own zoom levels?
If you can just try it real quick, Stephen, I think
Yep.
that'd be great. Thanks.
I do not see where is zooming here.
Maya,
Because
if you are,
I do not see I do not watch it in my browser. I have a separate application.
Is that any better, guys? It's about to revert.
There's a
Okay.
pull down called View Options.
yeah, but I think Maya
Right
is
next to where it says you are viewing Stephen's screen. And I'm sorry.
Maya is using an app. Probably, she's not using the browser.
On my app, I'm using the app as well, and it has that option.
It has the option. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I found it. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So is this any better? I just lowered the resolution. It doesn't look like it's really much better, to be honest.
I can't tell the difference.
It is better.
No, Maya is doing it on her side. So Stephen, you should be good now.
Yeah. Ted, are you okay, or you? I mean, I lowered the resolution. Didn't seem to make any difference when it did
Yeah.
that.
No, that's okay. I don't want to totally throw you off, sidetrack you. So why don't you go ahead, keep going.
Okay.
Sorry for the interruption.
No worries. Okay, so we were loading some data. So import. Okay. So I'm going to import the CSV. Kind of very, if you've ever done any importing in Excel, it's very much the same sort of thing. So one of the things I'm going to do is change the type. So along here, kind of again, like very similar to Excel, it basically takes a guess as to what is the data type of that column. And then you can actually change the data type. It also takes a guess as to what might be the role of that column, right? So it's not going to be smart enough to be able to figure out, is this a label column, but it tries to do other things like, you know, this is a polynomial, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, I'm going to change this guy's role to be an ID, right? Because I happen to know that this actually says shipped report ID because I looked at the data earlier. And so in the rest of the application, it'll record that when we save this data, and it'll know that this is an ID field. The other thing I can do is I can rename the column. So I don't know if you guys have noticed, but for some reason, there's some spurious characters up the front here. So while we're here, we might as well do that. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to do, again, I mean, you could spend all day doing all this sort of stuff. But the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change some of these. So these two columns, the start time and the end time, they're actually times. And clearly, whoever exported it didn't do a really good job because the time zone didn't get carried over, all that sort of stuff. But I'm going to change it just from a date time just to a time, because I think that is going to be what's more relevant to us. Okay. And then I'm going to save it. So you'll notice I've got here a whole bunch of things called backups, and that's just because in case anything goes wrong, I've got a backup that we can continue on. So I'm going to save this as Before I go too far, let me tell you a little bit about this data and what this represents. So this is some real world data, which means we're going to get some real world results, which are going to be disappointing towards the end. So a little bit of spoiler alert, but this is some real world data that we have gotten in another group that I participate in at the beginning of the year, where they do health service outreach to the homeless in an area around Brisbane, Australia, basically, right? And so then they record a number of a number of pieces of information about each shift that had occurred. Now, unfortunately, there's not a lot of data here. If you look down here, you can see there's 191 rows, 23 columns. It's also summarizing to say that there's 5 nominal, think of it like class, category, label, text, 15 numerical, and 3 dates is what it's figured out. Now, here, this is where, you continue doing your data prep. And basically, you've got, you can transform things, you can cleanse things, you can generate data, et cetera, sort of thing. So as far as transforming is concerned, I'll just give you a quick view. We're not going to do too much here. But transforming, you can pick something. For example, you can rename it, you can change its type, you can remove it, copy it, filter it, subsample it, sort it, do all that sort of stuff, right? So again, nothing that a lot of other programs don't do. Likewise, as far as cleansing is concerned, you can pick a column and then you can do things like you can say, remove low quality. So low quality is things, it looks at a number of different criteria. How similar is all the data within there? How many missing values and stuff like that? So here you could actually say, I want to throw away any column where more than, 80% of the values are missing and stuff like that. So again, this is all sort of data cleansing, data conditioning sort of thing. One of the really nice features that I kind of like is this, it gives you this little histogram on the top there, what I call like a sparkline histogram. So in Excel, you've got where in a cell, you can actually do like a mini graph. This is kind of showing you a histogram of the values in that particular column. And if you want to get a little bit more detail, for example, let's go look at something like service. Right, I can go to show details and it'll actually tell me a little bit more about it. So here are all the different values. Here's how many times they occur, what percentage of the total population they are, et cetera, sort of thing. Okay, so I think what might be really kind of interesting to do here. So again, we can go through more of it. You can do pivots, you can merge data if you've got two different data sets. You can do charts, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm going to show you is let's generate two columns based on existing data. So I think what I was interested in, so okay, I told you what this data is about. This data is about this organization that does healthcare outreach to the homeless, and they basically record a number of pieces of information about each of the shifts. Things like how many patients did they turn away, how many consults did they do, how many conversations with patients did they have, et cetera, et cetera. That's what all of these columns are. What I would like to do, so I set out with, and again, one of the things I'm very adamant about always is you always have to have an end objective in mind when you're doing something with the data. So what I what I set out to do is, I think it would be kind of useful for the business to know what would its staffing levels need to be on any given day. Would I be able to predict at some point in the future, based on this very tiny amount of data, right, on any given day, what would be my staffing needs? Now, as an intermediate step to that, what I might do is, let's say, let me see if I can predict the number of patient conversations, which is this column here, sort of thing. And if I go look at this column really quickly, I can kind of see that, okay, it varies a little bit. I'm missing about 10% of the value, so that's not too bad, sort of thing. So I think that might be okay to try and predict on, and I'll clean that up, sort of thing. So what I'm going to set out to do is see, can I come up with a model that is going to predict the number of patient conversations, right, as a proxy or as a first step towards what I really wanted to get to, which is, can I predict what are going to be my staffing needs on any given night or any given shift? Okay, so I think one of the things or a couple of things that might be interesting to try and help with that is, I'd like to generate a couple of columns, and specifically what I'd like to do is, extract out of the shift report date column, what day of the month it was, and then what day of the week it was, right? Because maybe there's some sort of cyclicality there that I'd like to, some sort of a model to try and pick up on. Or maybe I'm going to try and use that later on. Okay. Oops. Wrong column. Right. Okay. Now here you've got a little builder, so you can come in here. Again, remember, all of this is geared towards people who don't necessarily know how to code, right? At this point in time. So I'm going to come in here and I want a date calculation. And really what I want to do is I want to get a portion of the date. And that's going to be the shift report date that I want to get, right? So notice everything's kind of drag and drop. And then specifically what I want to get, I come down here and I look at the constants. I have to now tell it which part of the date is it that I'm trying to extract. I want the date unit day. Right. So if I've done this correctly, I should be able to update the preview. And yep, there it is. So that's the day of the month, basically. Right. Again, didn't really need to know too much about coding, which is the people that it's really geared towards. Okay, so if I like that, I can say commit. And then let's do the same thing, but basically this time for the day of the week.
Hey, Stephen, sorry, are you open to questions now, or?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
The commit, that's not like in a Git sense, right? That's just saving state.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, yes. It basically says, I want to save this state. And then what we're going to do at the end, I'll show you in a couple of steps. You can either export the entire process for all of the steps that we did as its own process of how we conditioned the data, so that you could then apply those same steps to another set of data. Or you can just save out the data itself in its final format kind of thing. But no, it's not a Git kind of commit, no.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, sorry, I lied. What I want to extract is the I think the other thing that might be interesting is the shift duration. Maybe the shift duration is going to tell me something about what my staffing needs would be, right? So that's the other thing I want to get. And same thing. So I'm going to do a date diff here, and I'm going to do the so if that works.
Hey, Steven, so as you're building this expression, it has like parentheses and commas. So maybe a good analogy would be somebody who's comfortable with Excel would hopefully be comfortable building something like this.
Correct. Yeah. Yes, I would agree with that. So thing. And so what I've done here is I've done a date difference between the start time and the end time. Remember, there were two of the fields that we changed the types earlier on. So thing. And it's giving me, if you look at the definition of this, it gives you the difference in milliseconds, right? So I'm just going to divide by 1,000 just to get it down to seconds here. Okay. Cool. So I don't know that I want to do much more, but as I said earlier, I could create a process out of this, which is basically going to take us into the design view and save off all of the steps as the components of RapidMiner itself, using the appropriate operators basically, so that I could reproduce all of the steps that I just did here, which is basically the, adding the shift duration, adding the, extracting the day of the month kind of thing, right? The other thing I can do is I can also just export the data, right? So I can sort of say, I like the data the way it is right now, and I'm going to export, which is what we're going to do. The one thing I will also point out is, if you remember when we were doing the original import, I said that one of the columns, the shift report ID, was an ID. Notice it's thrown it to the end. Because it knows it's an ID, it's kind of putting it out of the way for you, because it says it thinks it's not really going to be that useful for you in terms of cleansing data. So kind of it's still there, but it's kind of out of the way for you. Okay. So I'm going to save this. So this is an export. And again, different formats you can save it in: Excel, CSV, Click as well. I'm going to save it in a repository. Now, one of the things that I'm going to mention at the end, but I might as well just say it now, is that it's very much geared towards structured data. This thing really started off its life as being able to import CSV and Excel files. Then they added databases kind of thing, and only recently have they added other data formats as well, at least as far as I'm aware. So I'm going to save this in a local repository. Yep, that's my local, and I'm going to call it So that's as much as I really wanted to do it. So as far as my process is concerned, and again, this is where I'm going to give you a very kind of skewed view of how I do things. As far as my process is concerned, what I would normally do is I'd come in here, I'd do some cleanup. To be quite honest, I might do most of the cleanup in Excel because I just find it's a little bit of an easier tool to use. If I want to do visualizations, even though yes, it has a charts here, for example, that you can do all sorts of visualizations with it. Honestly, I prefer something like Tableau, right? That's just my preference kind of thing. So what I would then do is, okay, I've imported the data, done some basic cleaning up sort of thing. The next thing is that I'm really curious about is there something there, right? Is there some signal there? Is this really worth pursuing, right? So this is going to move us now away from data prep over to AUTOML. Right, so if I come over here to the designer just for a second, what I just did is I just saved that data. If I go here under my local repository, under the demo, you can see that I just saved. So this is what I imported, right, in that very first step. And then here is what I just saved, the Sunny Street transformed, right? So now what I would normally do is I say, okay, my data is in good enough shape. Let me go through a whole bunch of models against it and see if if I've got something there or not. So let's start off with, oops.
Steve, can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there a way to look at correlations in any of those columns before running a model?
Yes, there is. In the Turbo Prep, you can do that. It'll also show you that as a result of the models itself.
Nice. Thanks.
Oops. Okay, so here it is. Now, the next thing it's going to ask you, so if you guys want to advance one slide, and I stopped my slide, so give me a second, I'll bring back the right slide. So that was data prep, right? Now we're moving from data prep to AutoML sort of thing. So I also apologize, the formatting of these slides is not ideal, but I wanted to go for something that had a light background so that if you guys decide you want to print it out, it's not, you know, running your inkjet wells dry kind of thing. I really like things that have like black backgrounds and colorful backgrounds, but one of the things I've learned the hard way is when you go to print them, oh my God, do they destroy your print cartridges and, you know, your inks sort of thing, right? So now we're doing AutoML. So AutoML kind of looks at a couple of different things. So the idea behind it, the process is you want to select the target, then you want to, if it's appropriate, tell it kind of what sort of loss function you want and how to weight it. And then it'll make suggestions based on some statistical analysis of which columns to include, which ones to include, what are the appropriate model types based on the AutoML type that you're trying to do up here, whether it's a classification, whether it's a regression, meaning you're trying to predict something, or whether you're looking at outliers. So if I go back, to the IDE, the first thing you have to do is decide what kind of ML you're going to do. Are you going to predict something? Are you trying to classify something? Or is this kind of an outlier, right? So for this, what I said my initial goal is I'm going to try and predict the patient conversations, right? As a first step towards maybe eventually getting to figure out what would be my resourcing needs for a particular shift, my staffing needs. So I'm going to say, I want to do a prediction, and then it's going to say, okay, which is the column you're trying to predict? So for us, that would be, in this case, patient conversations. Now here you have the option of basically turning it into a classification problem if you wanted, right? Where you say you're trying to predict categories. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I really am trying to do a numerical regression kind of thing. But if you were to do that, you can then also give it different cost weightings for the different categories, right? Okay, so this I find actually quite a useful little tool, piece of the tool. It goes through and it looks at what it calls the quality of each of these columns, each of the attributes. And it basically makes suggestions as to which ones to exclude and why you want to include it. So if you look at these really quickly, one of the great things is it has these little help things, right? So over here, you'll notice that it has this little key, this little legend, basically a mini histogram, if you like. And it's basically telling you the C stands for columns that are very correlated to the label, basically. Columns, I means columns where the values are completely different. So it's trying to figure out, is this an ID column, basically. The S is columns where the values are all identical, basically, so you don't get much variation, hence it's not going to be able to help you predict much, sort of thing. Columns where there's values missing, and then columns that it thinks are text, right? So that's what these things are. And based on those, it's basically going to say, you know, I don't think you should include the shift ratings because we don't see a lot of difference in that. And that's true. If you actually go look at the shift ratings, it's a long textual, it's a text column that they then broke out into subsequent columns, sort of thing. And so there isn't a lot of variation. You can see, right, the stability is really high, meaning it's pretty, all of the different attribute values are pretty identical, and it thinks that it might be a text type field, right? So it makes us. Now, the interesting one here that I would suggest we probably want to extract is the shift measures, right? So I would want to exclude that. And that's, again, if you look at this, it's 100% a text field, and it really is a text field. It's not helpful. And they have, whoever did the export took the time of trying to have tokenizing it out and splitting it into some of these other columns. So I'm going to exclude that. So this I find, like I said, kind of useful. Okay, and then based on the type of ML that I'm trying to do, whether it was a classification or a regression, etc., it's going to suggest a bunch of models, sort of thing. Some of the, let's get rid of this. One of the interesting things over here is this one, because there are date fields in the data, it will try and automatically do a lot of feature engineering on that, right? So it's going to try and automatically pull out the day of the week, the day of the month, and stuff like that, right? And look at all sorts of different aspects of the dates and the times. Okay, so now comes the moment of truth. Go and run a whole bunch of these models on my machine. It doesn't take too long, actually.
So while this runs, actually, I have a question. Because I noticed before in the previous one, or in the previous data exploration part, there was a lot of question marks, which I'm assuming are like NaN values, or can
they're missing values. The question marks are missing values, yeah.
Missing values. I'm assuming there's a part within that data exploration that you can clean that up and change it to whatever you want, or I guess, yes. How would you?
Yes, yeah. In the data prep, you can decide, yes, what you want to do with missing values and all that. You can either exclude them, you can, so part of it, which I didn't touch on, is the normalization of data, and under the normalization of data, then you can decide how you want to treat missing values, right? Do I just put in the average? Do I try and preserve the statistical nature of it, so that I don't alter the average and the standard deviation? How do I want to, treat it? Yes, that's available. Okay, so it ran and it basically says, so as you can see, not really good results, right? So what this tells me is it's probably not worth pursuing too much. But from here, if I want a particular model, I can deploy a particular model, which we're not going to do right now, sort of thing. But I think the one that I want to play around with is a support vector machine, because I just have a sort of intuitive feeling it's going to lend itself better to being able to model multiple columns, sort of thing. But the one that did the best is the random forest, right? So that's what this little guy means. Best performance random forest, not by a lot. And again, the performance isn't really great. So like I said, what I took away from this is that it's probably not worth pursuing too much. Now, interestingly enough, all the models are over here. And if you want to, you can look at these models, right? And Deanna, to your point, you can look at the weights that it gave and a whole bunch of different things for each one of the different models.
Hey, Stephen, on the previous screen, it showed a standard deviation. Is it doing k-fold cross-validation automatically?
I don't think so, but I'm not actually sure of that. It does a whole bunch of stuff in the background kind of thing, right? It just makes assumptions and does it. And then, so you can look at each one of the different models. And if you like one of these models, for example, you can go ahead and you can deploy it, or you can open it up as a process in the design window and start working on it, sort of thing. I'll show you what that looks like. It's kind of not particularly pretty. But let's say, and then Deanna, to your point, so here is, sorry, the weights by correlation and the correlations between all the different columns. This includes the columns that the feature engineering columns that it created, right?
So it will automatically explore the features and drop some and keep others for each of those different models. It will explore which features might be relevant or not, or does it keeps all the features?
I think it keeps all the features. I don't think it drops any features. It adds, but I don't think it drops. So let's say that we are interested in the support vector machine sort of thing. And so what I can then do is open the process.
What is a kernel here? I don't see.
The kernel of the support vector machine.
Yes.
I don't know what kernel it used, to be honest. And I don't see anything in here that tells us either. Again, this is geared towards, doing a lot of stuff for you, making a lot of assumptions. Once you get into the design and we look at how to do that, as you copy in the operators give you a heck of a lot more access or parameters that you can configure. And some of the operators are very specific when we go look at that.
Hey, Stephen, down below model is optimal parameters. I don't know if it'll say there, if it used like linear or RBF.
Kernel gamma, I see.
Well, that's just one of the parameters for the kernel, but.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so then it does this really ugly thing. This used to be a lot nicer back in the old days. It wasn't this complicated. As they've gone on, they've made it more and more complicated. And because it got so complicated, they basically ended up having to group components together and put them into these sub-processes. And then the sub-processes aren't even connected anymore, because what they do is within each one of the processes, they tell it to remember something. And then once you remember something, you can, in another sub-process, you can then recall it, sort of thing, rather than having to save it. So the idea is I'm not saving it to disk, it's just in memory, sort of thing, but I can pass it around from one of these groups to another group, and each group does something, right? So some of them split the data, some of them do feature engineering, some of them transform columns, et cetera, right? Okay, so that's basically the AutoML process. And then you could use this as a starting point. I think it's really disgusting and ugly, and I don't know that I would use it as a starting point. So thing. For me, the value in the AutoML is to give me an idea of, is there, if I look at that one, if I look at, all of the models that were applied, is there something there, right? If I got a better response, if I got a lower error, or I got a higher accuracy, and because of the model that we've chosen, the things that we're modeling, we don't have accuracy, but often accuracy is one of the criteria that's available and evaluated. If I had a higher accuracy or a lower relative error, then I might think it's worth pursuing. But for for demonstration purposes, let's pretend that we want to do some design work and that we're actually going to try and do a support vector machine.
So Stephen, when you first started using RapidMiner however many years ago, they already had this AutoML type of functionality?
I think shortly afterwards they introduced it. And again, when I did it, it was about 10 years ago. So I think shortly afterwards, yeah, I think they were one of the first people to bring AutoML, the concept, to the market. I don't know that they do the best job of AutoML anymore. I think there might be others who do a much better job. But my recollection was that they were one of the sort of pioneers.
That's cool.
It is. It is. Okay, so that's a quick and dirty overview of AutoML. Just keep moving on. So now let's talk about actual doing some machine learning, right? So this IDE is all about designing, designing the process that will do these steps that we're going to do next. And you have a whole bunch of different operators, right? So there's data loading operators, manipulation operators, et cetera, et cetera. Let me show you what that, so all of the operators are over here. So I didn't do this at the beginning, but quick overview of the IDE now that we're in the design sort of phase of it. So at the top here, you have all of your data repositories, right? So you can go, I haven't touched on AI Hub yet, but AI Hub is that remote server that I talked about. under here, you've got all of the different operators, and they're basically grouped, and there's a ton of them. They're grouped into different categories of operators, whether it's sort of reading files and accessing databases and files, whether it's transforming data, blending data together, cleansing it, the actual modeling, applying a model, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to go through some of those steps in a second. A couple that I'll actually point out that I thought were kind of interesting is and by the way, since there's so many of them, the best way to find something is if you kind of have a half idea what the operator is called, you kind of type it in. So this one here, the model simulator, when I click on it, you'll notice that things over here update. So the parameters will only update when I've selected something in the design view, but when I just click on an operator, the help will update. And one of the really cool things that I'll show you in a little bit is that this model simulator basically allows you to create a UI that shows you the highest weighted attributes and how altering them alters the prediction, and allows you to do that graphically in real time kind of thing. So we'll come back to that. But let's start off. I'm going to go to a blank process. And we are going to start by pulling in the data, right? So here's the data that we just cleaned up. And we're going to do some things. So we're going to, just from the perspective of showing you how stuff are done. So we're going to basically turn one of the dates, so the shift report date, we're going to add the day of the week, right? So again, like I said, rather than trying to always go through all of these operators, the fastest way to do it is, since I know what I'm looking for. So if you type in date, here are all the ones that do date sort of thing, and I want date to numerical. All right, so I grab it and I basically connect. All right, so this is the graphical aspect, right? So this loads in my data. If I wanted to see my data, I can just double click on it and it'll throw it into the results tab. So this is what my data looks like, and go back and forth, right? And I want to say, okay, I want to convert. Notice that it's limited my choices here just down to the ones that are date and time fields. So I want to convert the shift report date, and I want to extract the day, and I don't want to extract the day of the month, I want to extract the day of the week. And I also want to keep the old attribute. So this could replace the attribute, or it could add a new column, right? Add a new attribute kind of thing. So it's really kind of that simple in terms of modifying it, right? Now, what you don't get here, and this is one of my pet peeves, is you don't also get the opportunity to rename this. So if I want to rename that field, it's going to call it whatever it decides to call it, right? And I can always see this because one of the things I can do is I can, so what I'm doing is I'm connecting this to the output of this whole process. Remember, there's sub-processes and sub-processes and sub-processes. So whatever you connect becomes available to the container to share to some other container or to the next step in the process. So I can always just run this, right, and see what it creates. And then I like, so that you can look at this, but then also there's a statistic view. And it probably threw it at the end. So right, so it created that field that we just created is called shift report date day.
So Stephen, you are saying that we cannot take this back to Turbo Prep and rename it?
We cannot take it back to Triple Prep, sorry?
The Turbo Prep.
Mm-hmm.
So you
no.
are, is it, no?
You could rename it, yeah, sorry. You could reload the data. So yes, after this, you could save the data out. So this would be, this is the result of what I just did, right? So I can save this and then use this as a starting point and load that into Turbo Prep.
Right.
But you don't have to do that. There is a rename operator. What I'm saying is it would be really nice. Sorry, I wasn't.
Right.
If I could rename it in here,
Right, right.
while I'm transforming it, rather than have to basically
Gotcha.
rename it. So okay, call it. For example, right? This is a pet peeve of mine. I really wish I didn't have to add a whole new operator in and
Right.
do all this typing and all that sort of stuff. Right. So now, if I look at my data, I'm just going to continually run this. This is kind of how I do it, right? This is all well and good, but one of the things that I am missing in order to be able to predict anything, right, is what's my target? What's my label? So again, of course, in RapidMiner, there are operators for everything. It happens to be called set role, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So now I get to say, what's my target? My target, I said, was going to be patient conversations. And it's going to be the label. Right, so there's different ones you can put in here. You can tell it it's an ID, for example. That's what we did when we're importing it. I could do it here, for example. Something I can also tell it that it's a prediction or it's a weight, or batching is if I wanted to be able to divide my data by batches kind of thing. I would be able to tell it that this is the batching attribute, right? And to divide the data according to the batching attribute if I wanted to be splitting the data up for, let's say, validation later on or something like that. But for this, I just want to say, I'm going to change the patient conversation to be a label, which means it's now the target, right? Sort of thing. So what am I trying to do? I'm basically sort of saying, I've done some cleansing on my data. I need to do a little bit more transformation. I need to tell it what it's going to aim for. I'm going to have to do a couple more filter steps, and then I can actually do the training. And the training of the model has a very specific sort of structure, which I will show you in a second. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I want to choose. I don't know that I necessarily want. So you'll notice now that I set the label, that in the results, it shows me it in a different color, right? So it's highlighting the fact that, okay, so this is now your target. Now, I don't believe that all of these columns are necessarily relevant to the support vector machine. So I'm actually going to filter some of them out. And if you guys will excuse me 1 second, I'll be back in 1 sec.
I'm curious for the team. So have you guys ever used RapidMiner in the past?
It's the first time I've seen it.
Gotcha.
I've been aware of its existence for a long time, but I've never directly opened it and ran it. It's actually very similar to a lot of the stuff we do at H2O. So it's kind of interesting to get this first exposure of this
Right.
tool.
Mm.
There was a tool called Insightful Miner about 10, 15 years ago that had some similar overlap in functionality where you could test different methods, you upload a data set. I looked up that tool. That tool called the Insightful Miner tool seems to have disappeared. I wonder if it was merged with one of these.
Sorry about that. Okay. So let's choose some attributes. So let's drop some columns. So columns. And then remember what Tommy said earlier, that not all of my labels have the question. So the question marks, not all my labels have values. So in order to, again, make things better for the support vector machine, I'm just going to take the easy way out for this example. And I'm just going to remove those rows, right? So I'm going to drop some columns, I'm going to drop some rows, and then we'll be ready to feed that into a support vector machine. I'm doing it in the wrong way. Okay, so again, all point and click type stuff. So which ones do I think that I really need in here? I'm going to choose some. I'm going to say, I think end time might be useful. A lot of these numbers, the medical consults, the mental health, I believe are all captured by the number of patient conversations. I think the patient conversations happens to be kind of an aggregate of all of those. I'm not 100% sure that that actually works out all the time. So I'm going to exclude a lot of them because I think they're actually going to be highly correlated and it's not really going to help. Again, you probably wouldn't really want to do it this way. So I'm going to do that. The service is basically where the shift happened. So that I definitely want. Then I want the duration. I think I'll put in the date. Actually, no, I won't put in the day of the month, the day of the week, start time. I think that'll do for now. Again, if I want to see what that looks like, I just go ahead, play it, and I say, okay, I've now whittled it down to just a handful of attributes. Now I want to filter those. Remember I said that not all of my labels have values, so that's really easy. I can just sort of say, I only want patient conversations or rows with patient conversations where the value is not missing. So there were 191 before, 191 rows. Now you'll notice that there's only 172.
Hey, Stephen, I don't know if you're going to know the answer to this, but one of the questions I always ask whenever there's a tool that has a graphical interface with widgets is, rather than having to click on each one or right click on each one or double click on each one and see the different configurations for each widget, is there a way to sort of export a summary that says, here's all the steps? You know, sometimes it's XML, JSON, or some proprietary summary.
Yeah, it allows you to export, and I haven't done this, but I do know it can do it. It allows you to export an XML file with its own extension, basically. I think it's RPD or something like that for RapidMiner. But it's basically an XML file with a summary of all of the components that you've put in and how they're all connected up and what the configuration of each component is, so that you could then re-import it into another system or something like that. Yeah.
And is that XML somewhat human readable or no?
I am going to have to lie to you at this point. I'm not sure because I have really never paid too much attention to it. I know it exists and I've even seen it, but I've never really paid too much attention to it.
Yeah, so the reason where I'm going is for just doing some ad hoc thing, like this is fine. But for me, if I'm doing something for work, then I need a way for a second person to review the workflow that you've created.
Yeah.
Right.
So we'll get to that. Again, I hope you guys are okay with the time. We'll get to that when we start talking about ML ops, right? And how to basically allow multiple people to work on this. We haven't touched on the sort of the server part yet, right? And that's what we're going to get to in a second.
Okay, cool.
After I finished with this kind of thing. If we want, I mean, I can just speed this along, but you guys get this, get the idea. I think the interesting part is now, it comes now. So as far as, so I've got everything I need at this point to basically fit into a support vector machine, right? Or train a support vector machine. And it's done in a very particular way. So in this particular case, I am going to do a cross-validation. Now, if you notice, this operator has a double boundary around it, sort of thing, which means it's a sub-process, or it's a process that has things inside of it, right? Sort of thing. So if I double-click on it and go into the process, you'll see that there's a training and a testing. if I just click on it, the parameters that it allows me to do is it allows me to basically say how I want to split. Remember there was that batch attribute before that I was talking about? You can nominate something, set a role for it to be a batch attribute, so you can split along batches if you want, et cetera, et cetera. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside it just to keep things easy to understand. I will tell it what I'm feeding into it. And then what I'm going to do, so because I have very few examples here, right? We're down to 170, whatever it was, 171 or something, 72. I'm going to use, so this is where you would do the folding, right? So this is where you set up the folding. I would basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a variation which is the leave one out, right? It gives you all sorts of different ways of doing the sampling and all that sort of stuff. So what the leave one out is going to do, and by the way, under the validation, there is a ton more different ways of doing validation. Let me show you really quickly. So there's bootstrapping, there's wrapping, there's all sorts of different ways of doing a validation. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this leave one out because I have so few examples. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I want you to go and train on this data for as many rows as I have, and each iteration, I want you to basically pull one of the rows out and train on all the remaining data, right? And then use that one row to test it, kind of thing, right? So it's one way of doing it, not the only way of doing it. So inside of it, how do we do this? So inside of it, this is where I want the support vector machine. So I'm going to train the support vector machine. I'm going to output its model. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, this is kind of a structure that you just have to learn about RapidMiner. This is just how it does it, right? So you train it on the one side, and then on the other side, the testing is I apply the model, and then I grade its performance, right? So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to need to apply the model. And then I need to measure its performance. So then I just take the model, feed it into the model. The nice thing about it is here, so remember I'm going to feed the testing data into the unlabeled port. And I'm going to feed the labeled into the performance. So what this is basically going to do is after the support vector machine is trained, it's going to export that model into the apply model. The apply model is going to take all of those weights sort of thing. It's going to apply them to my test data, which I've said at this point, we can do a number of different ways, but at this point I'm saying it's the leave one out method sort of thing. And then it's going to export its prediction as well as the test data to the performance, which is then going to basically rank our performance. And then it's just a matter of you connect the performance port to the performance port, the test data to the test data port, and now I've got this one internally all linked up. So this is just a structure you need to learn, right? I train the model, I apply the model, I measure its performance. And then from here, I can export that to, I can get the model out, I can export the performance out, I can even export the test. So let's run it. Let's see what happens. Oh. Okay. So it's complaining about the fact, so I've obviously missed a step. It's complaining about the fact that I have not converted all of the data to numerical. So rather than sit here and basically fix all of that, since you've now gotten kind of a feel for it, sort of thing, I'm just going to load my backup. Okay, so that's the same thing. The extra step that I forgot to add in is this nominal to numerical, right? So it's going to go through and it's going to basically find all the attributes, all the columns that are basically a label, like a city name or something like that, and it's going to convert it into a number. And what I'm saying is I've chosen, you can do different things, but you can do dummy encoding or effective encoding. I'm saying just convert it into a unique integer, right? So remember before when we looked at the data, there were several locations where the shifts were occurring. So each one of those locations will become a number. Now, what I'll do is I will remove this guy temporarily, and then I'll add him back in again. Okay, let's run it. So I got a RMS of 6.5, not great, sort of thing. I can look at the model and look at the weights table. So this is how it weighted the different attributes. Remember, I limited the number of attributes, sort of thing. I can visualize it just to see how each one of them is contributing, whether it's a positive or a negative correlation, et cetera, et cetera. I can try and, here are the support vectors, I can try and visualize those as well. So there's a whole bunch of data I can look at. I can also look at patient conversations, but it didn't give me the, okay. Sorry, let me rerun it. So if I export this guy, sorry, and then rerun it, we'll actually get to also see. So here's the actual number, and here's the number that it predicted. And as you can see, not really great, which is what, you know, we learned from the turbo prep, that the, you know, the relative error was still pretty big, sort of thing. And then the root mean square was also, you know, fairly high. So for the sorts of numbers that we're dealing with. So we know that it's not a particularly good model. Okay. Now, remember I said earlier that there's a really cool thing that you can do, which is the model simulator. So this is one of the things that I find is unique about it. And one of the emphases that RapidMiner always makes is they want you to be able to explain the model, right? So it's fine that you came up with a model, but now you want to be able to explain it. So in order to do that, one of the things that they introduce is this operator called a model simulator. So it's going to do the model, it's going to do the it doesn't like it, sorry. Oh. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, so this is the thing I just added. So this allows you to basically say in real time, if I alter the value of any of these, how does it alter my prediction, right? So if, for example, I say that the shift duration, remember this is in seconds, comes down, how does altering the shift duration alter my prediction based on the support vector model that I have, right? So you could, the idea behind this is that you should be able to show somebody and be able to convince somebody that, you know, here are the parameters that are important, and it, you know, and as I vary them, you can see how it varies the prediction of the model. thought that's kind of cool. And that's one of the things that I haven't, they've been emphasizing for a while, and I'm only just starting to see this now with others. Okay, so we've basically at this point, we have been able to train a support vector machine. We didn't get very good results, like I said earlier. I didn't think there was a lot of signal there. But let me save this.
Steve, in terms of data shift duration, what does that exactly mean? What does it represent?
The shift duration?
Yeah.
It was the number of seconds for the shift. So the data that we got had a shift date and a shift start time and a shift end time. And so what I did is I calculated basically how long was that shift.
Got it.
In seconds. Okay, so now I think it's time to, so any questions there? I'm going to move on to talking about sort of ML ops and the capabilities there. And here I'm going to talk a little bit more about the slides, and I will show you a couple of things. Okay, so as far as ML ops is concerned, they have this product called AI Hub, which is basically their remote server, and it comprises four things basically. It comprises the RapidMiner server itself, a dashboard. It allows you to basically, okay, so it allows you to run a remote server. It allows you to basically develop dashboards using a tool called Grafana, which is open source. It allows you to create some very rudimentary web apps, like I said, using a tool called Web App Designer. And it also allows you to create Jupyter notebooks, right, using Jupyter Hub. Now, under the RapidMiner server itself, it allows you to basically run the same process that I've just been running now. So the same things that I've been doing, it allows you to now run them on the server. So if you notice when I'm trying to run here, I can run the process locally, I can run it in the background, but these other two are grayed out. I cannot run it on what it calls AI Hub, which is its server. If I had deployed these on the server, I would then have a choice. I can either run it locally or I can run it on the server. So that allows me to basically do, like I said, vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. So vertical scaling is I can have a much beefier machine on the cloud than I have, you know, my little laptop. I can also horizontally scale out in that it has built into it this whole idea of jobs and job queues and the ability to spawn multiple jobs to serve either the same process and split it out, or to be able to serve multiple processes at the same time. The other thing that it allows you to do is it allows you to do remote collaboration, right? So now I can put that model out on the server and I can have other people work on it as well. And we can version control it. I can permission who has access to it, who has read access, who has write access, who has access to execute, those sorts of things. It also, because it's out there on a server now, it also allows you to programmatically control that process through either REST API or Python API. One of the really cool things, I think, which then ties into you know, the dashboards and the web apps, is the ability to publish web services. So once I have a process out there, and I'll show you actually how that happens, I can now publish a web service that I can hit using a REST API from the public internet, right? So this allows me to do things like, once I've got which is what I'm going to show you, once I have a process that I like, that the support vector machine, let's pretend it really had some good results, right? I could then expose that as a web service, and then people could basically submit data to it, and it would give them back the staffing prediction for the data that they submitted, right? And then they can do that through whatever tool that, you know, they feel most comfortable with. The other thing that it does is real-time scoring. And again, this is a new extension that I have not played with at all, so I'll just mention it for completeness, but that's all I can really do. So it's the idea of, like I just said, you are able to, in real time through a stream, submit data to a model that you have published, right? Support vector machine or a neural network or something like that. And it will actually create the prediction also in real time. So the idea is you can be hitting it with data, and then it'll be creating the data in real time. And because you're running it on a server sort of thing, you can scale it appropriately to be able to do that. Right? So this is where we there's two aspects to the ML ops here. There's the aspect of how do we collaborate, but there's also the aspect of how do I put this into production, right? So that I have data coming in, the data is being automatically acted on, and then I'm producing results, predictions based on that data.
So I have a basic question about the deployment here. So is it true that if a company doesn't have the AI hub, how would we deploy the RapidMiner process to a web service, or that can be done entirely independent of the AI hub?
You would have to basically then have your own server that you would convert this code into something that you can run and then expose it. So you'd have to set up your own server basically.
Gotcha.
Okay. Short of it.
All right.
So the whole idea is they're trying to give you a one-stop shop, right? So in terms of actually provisioning this thing, they have a virtual machine in Amazon and a virtual machine in Microsoft Azure. I'm not sure about Google Cloud Services, sort of thing, where you can basically just go and instantiate that virtual machine, and that virtual machine has all those components on it, which I'll show you in a second, right? So it's got the RapidMiner server on it, it's got the Grafana dashboard, it's got the web app designer, it's got the Jupyter Hub, all built in on that thing, all pre-installed, ready to go.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, so the last thing we need to do is, if we are, and so now let's talk about the this AI hub sort of thing, right? So that's their server. I'm gonna try connecting to it. Hopefully this will work. Yep, good. So now I can start deploying things out there, right? So again, I've got a number of these things that are back up. So in order for me to be able to do something out on AI Hub, what do I really need, right? So I really need three things. I need some fresh data, right? So that I'm going to assume would be coming in on a regular basis. I need a model, right? So I need to be able to take the support vector machine that we just trained in here, right? Assuming that, let's pretend that it actually worked well. And I need to be able to deploy it out there. But then I also need a process that basically does this apply model thing, right? So what I'm going to end up with is something that basically takes the model. So I'm going to save the model, takes the model, takes the new data, applies the model to the new data, and comes out with a prediction. So I really need three things, right? I need the model, I need the process that applies the model, and then I need my new data. And that's what I have out here already, sort of thing. So because I know we're probably going to run out of time, and I don't want to belabor this too much because I've been already, talking for a while, rather than going through the process of creating all of these different pieces from scratch, what I'm going to do basically is just show you the ones that I had pre-saved there, but I'll show you. So I won't create them from scratch, but I'll show you how easy it is to basically do this. So I will copy a couple of these things and then copy them in. So it's really just a case of copy paste. So this is the support vector machine. So what I did previously is I took this support vector machine and I basically saved it to disk, right? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that thing that I saved, that model basically, which is in its own RapidMiner format that it understands, and I'm going to copy it onto the server. That's all I'm going to do right now. So before I do that, I'm going to rename it. And then same thing. I'm just going to, and then come over here and paste, copy paste. Right. Same thing with the scoring. I'm going to show you what the scoring looks like so you can see. So it's very similar to what we just saw. So normally what I would do is I would take all of these which is the data conditioning that we just all stepped through. And I just basically stick it in a one box component, subcomponent, basically sort of saying, say, you know, this is what I need to do to any new data that I get in order to put it in the right format for me to apply that SVM to, right? So then basically it's really two steps. It's really read in the data and condition it, read in the model, the support vector machine, apply the model, and then output the prediction, right? So really this is just the scoring process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that guy. Rename it so it doesn't conflict with the one on the server. And same thing, I'm basically going to paste it on the server. Okay, so now on the server, what I have is I have a process that scores, I have my model saved, and I basically went and copied some of the existing data. I just copied a very small set, so I pretended like I was going to basically project for the next 2 weeks what my needs might be, kind of thing. And that's what the new data is. So what I really want to do now is I want to create a web service, right, in order to be able to expose this. And I'm going to show you how that would be done. Remember, I'm now going to access, I can get back to one second. Last step of the demo. So I went and provisioned a virtual machine that has all this sort of stuff on it, and I've already got it set up. And so what I was when I was copying, pasting the support vector machine and the scoring process, it was going onto the server. So I'm going to go and access that guy, and I've got to get the password. Which is not there. So I logged in as admin just to make sure I'm not going to have any sort of permissioning issues. This is the RapidMiner server. As I said, remember I said it has 4 main components to it. It's the server itself. It's this app designer. If you want, I can probably make bigger if you guys need me to make it bigger, because this is in a browser. So there's the app designer, there's the Grafana dashboards, and then there's the Jupyter notebooks, right? So what I want to do right now is I want to set up a web service based on that thing that I just copied. So before I do that, sorry, let me just check that the web service is going to run without any issues, or that process is going to run without any issues. So and I'm just going to run it locally to test that it's going to work. Perfect. Okay, so now I know I just tested it locally. I know it's going to work if I wanted to. One of the things that I now have options that I didn't have before is, remember here where I could only run it locally or run in the background. Now I can actually run it up on the server, or if I wanted to, I could schedule it to run later, right? Or I can schedule it to run on the hour or something like that, sort of thing. So let me save that and make sure it works properly. Let me go back to the server. So now I'm on the server. So So here is the backup that I made before, but I'm going to show you how quickly I can create a new web service. It's pretty straightforward. So let's call it. Call it staffing needs. I'm going to basically say go grab the scoring process for demonstration purposes. So you have a whole bunch of, you can export it in all sorts of different ways. You can make it JSON, XML, OData, etc., etc. I'm just going to make it a table, just so that we get to see something. And cool. Let me test that, make sure it works. Yep. So it's spitting out the table. It's spitting out basically the same thing as in the RapidMiner IDE, right? It's spitting out this table. So why is this kind of a, an interesting thing? Because it enables a whole bunch of other technologies, sort of thing. But now I can actually go and I can hit this thing. I copy paste. Actually, sorry, let me go back to the edit. Nope, that's not where I wanted to go. The test. There we go. So here is the link, basically. You have to modify it slightly because you need the actual address of this server, sort of thing. But if I wanted to, I could So this is me being able to hit it from any external application that I want, right? All I'm doing is I'm basically hitting a REST API called staffing needs that's published on this, now published on this server as part of this web service. It's going to run it. Oh, and it says it can't be reached. That's perfect.
I think there might be an extra zero. Oh, no. Okay, I thought there might be an extra zero.
You're right.
There.
There is. I'm not doing a good job of copying this properly. Let's try this again. This needs to be the address. And the address is 13. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay. So I'm hitting it successfully, but it's wanting some credentials. And that's the table, right? I mean, I wouldn't probably do this. This is just for demonstration purpose. I'd probably create some JSON or some XML or something to ship back. And the reality is I probably wouldn't do a whole table either. You probably would hit me with an input parameter on that API. So if you notice, the API has no input parameters, right? But what I would probably do if I was doing this in more of a product production perspective is I would probably pass in a specific date and shift, maybe even date, shift, and location or something like that, sort of thing. And then it would spit back the patient conversations, or ideally what it would spit back is, here's how many staff I think you need at that location, right? And I could spit that back as a JSON or an XML or something like that. So that pretty much concludes the demo portion of it. So as you can see, none of this is particularly hard. there are a ton of operators, like I said. Each one of those operators has umpteen configurations that you can do on it. And that's why they say it's suitable for both the novice, but also the practitioner as well. Now, I'll give you some opinions here, right? Because to me, the really useful part is me showing you how to use this sort of stuff and how cumbersome or easy it is to use, but also some of my opinions. I think it's really good for sort of very structured data. So they just, for example, they just added in October the ability to import images, which they haven't had until October, right? They've also just recently introduced neural networks, sort of thing. And so one of the things I want to play with, and maybe I'll show you guys at another Saturday, is can I take in, remember from our last book, we were doing the CFAR 10 data. Can I take in the CFAR 10 data and reproduce what we did in the book using this stuff, and how hard would it be? Sort of thing. So I think it's really good for structured data. I think they do really well at classification type tasks, exceptionally well. They do fairly well at regression and time series type tasks, right? So if you're trying to just do some sort of a regression, some sort of a classification, pretty good. I think it's fairly good for sort of no code, low code. I really like the interactive model, right? Where you basically get the sliders in terms of being able to present to somebody who's not an AI ML person, and explain to them what model you've come up with and what you think are the key attributes, right? Key criteria, sort of thing. And that's about it. I have not really used it very much for programming. They claim it's extensible. There is a Python basically module that you can add in that allows you to run any kind of Python code that you want, sort of thing, but I haven't really played with it, sort of thing. Okay. And with that, any other questions?
I have one. Could you go back to the RapidMiner screen?
Yes, I can.
I saw something very briefly, and I was kind of interested to see when you click that button in the top left that's like start a new project or file or whatever. Left of that. Yeah, that one. Yeah, if you click that, I saw that it's got churn modeling, direct marketing, all kinds of stuff like that.
So they have templates. Yep. So they have templates that you can basically do. So if you want, I can click on one, choose one, and I'll click on it and I'll show you what it kind of starts with.
Maybe just the churn modeling one. I'm just interested to see what they might do special there.
So this looks like it's it's hooked up to one. And so if you notice here in the repository, the top two things are basically all their own training resources and samples and things like that. So that's what this is drawing on. So I guess what it does is it grabs the customer data, sets the label role on the churn indicator. It converts it to a binomial, interestingly enough, and then it does a cross-validation. And as far as the cross-validation is concerned, it looks like they're doing some sampling, and then they're training a decision tree.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it kind of creates a custom pipeline template that you can work off of, and there's assuming it's going to work like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, that's what it does with all of these. Yep. And then they also have built into here, they also have this Learn tab, which is where you can step through and go through their tutorials where they teach you how to, clean up the data, et cetera, et cetera. I have to tell you, I've gone through all of these. This is a more recent installation, which is why it doesn't look like I've gone through them. Most of the attention is spent on getting the data ready to actually feed into a model, and to do this little process, where this cross-validation process, where it's basically you train on the left-hand side, you apply the model, and you rate the performance on the right-hand side.
So is this something that do you actively use RapidMiner, or is this?
Sporadically. So like I said, when I come across something that I want to kind of investigate and see if it's worth really putting any effort into, I will probably use it more for the AUTOML than anything else. I probably don't do too much in terms of the turbo prep, the data prep. I mean, I can do that on my own in Excel or in other tools, sort of thing. But the part that I find the most useful is the modeling, the auto modeling.
Have you ever taken anything all the way to deployment, or do you typically just go through the modeling phase and kind of learn what you need to learn?
I typically just go through the modeling phase.
Yeah. Okay.
And Ryan, I'm curious about your perspective on how this compares to H2O. What would be some of the major benefits that H2O has, given that we just have gone through this?
I think they're similar in a lot of ways. I would say they're not actually that different, but I think that driverless airs more. It has more focus on the modeling side and less focus on the data prep side. Driverless tries to do a lot of things automatically for you, so you don't have to actually do any data prep, and then it tries to put a lot of effort into the modeling section and gives you a lot of control on that stuff. But overall, they're actually fairly similar.
How about the deployment side?
I think they're similar in that regard too, actually. If you look at the options for deployment, our options are fairly similar. You can either basically get an output blob for Java and then you can deploy it on your own, or you can do our AWS, Google Cloud, whatever deployments, and it functions basically the same as what he showed.
Gotcha.
So in the AutoML functionality, was XGBoost available? I'm not sure I saw that, or I just.
I think it is. It has a ton of these models, right? I mean, there's 67 under here.
I saw there was gradient boosting machine, so it might not have necessarily been XGBoost, but it is that family of algorithm.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has gradient boosted trees. And by the way, they actually do use the H2O GBT.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
They've got a ton of them. And so one of the things that, so this is where I don't 100% buy into the, anyone can do this, because I'm just going to throw it in here for a second, right? If you look at this, there are a ton of hyperparameters that that you need to set. And if you really don't know what you're doing, sure, it'll do an okay job of giving you something, because that's the whole point of, giving you these default values. But I have my serious doubts that you would be able to get to a very accurate, refined model, sort of thing. And they have little tutorials on how to do the hyperparameter tuning. There's other little processes in here that basically are loops that allow you to go through and change each one of the hyperparameters and see, whether it improves the accuracy or not. But I have my doubts.
Have you tried to use it to show somebody who doesn't know much about models, how pipeline works?
Not the pipeline itself. So in other words, to teach somebody how to do ML. No, I personally haven't done it. What I have done a couple of times is used that model simulator, the one that had the little graphical thing where you can use the sliders to change the input values, and it shows you how it changes the prediction. I have used that to kind of explain to people the model that something has come up with. That I have found useful.
I thought the simulator also is quite useful as well. It's kind of a good kind of client-facing tool to run the what-if kind of scenarios. And my other question is for Dina, and I know that you have a great deal of experience with SageMaker. Do you have any perspective in terms of how that compares to RapidMiner?
Sure. With SageMaker, you don't have a lot of AutoML capabilities. It's more to manage like the notebooks and deployment, more on the ML ops side, rather than facilitating, particularly the data prep side. It's actually doesn't have much functionality to explore the data, but they're working on that. They've introduced some new tools within the last year to help in that area, and their annual conference is coming up, so it's they might be releasing some more functionality in that area. But for the time being, there's not a lot of support for testing different algorithms and looking at data. There's
Gotcha.
next to nothing on the visualization part. You have to build that yourself.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know,
Thank you.
Becky, I don't know, to answer a question you haven't even asked, but I know I've played around a little bit with Microsoft Azure's offering of their AutoML type stuff. I don't remember there being sort of the graphical tool that I was just saying,
Mhm.
but it also has classes of effectively ML that you can just apply to things, right? And sort of say
Right.
type of a problem, kind of like here, and then it'll
Exactly.
models. I have seen that in Microsoft Azure as well.
Yeah, I have played with Azure quite a bit as well, and I think that that's most similar to RapidMiner in terms of the pipeline and yeah, the types of models that you can select, and I mean they try to make it easier for you to make that decision. So for that reason, actually, I feel RapidMiner is most intuitive for my kind of background. Like even for the data prep side, we are used to using SPSS, which is a statistical package, and you literally see the rows and columns, and you manipulate the data on top of it, and you generate new variables by enforcing some of the formula and stuff like that. So it's definitely very nice. And now that I also even see, I think Stephen's your demonstration of all the ways to deployment, I think it's a nice kind of a flow there. Yeah.
So my recommendation, Becky, is, again, not that I know that you're even interested in it, but what I did in Turbo Prep, all of those have equivalent operators down here in the operators.
Right, right.
These operators here are way more powerful than the ones in Turbo Prep sort of things. For example, on the date ones, the number of things that you can control in date, the level of control that you can get to is far greater in the operators than you have available to you in Turbo Prep. So my recommendation for anyone who's thinking about it is, if you could get yourself just a little bit comfortable using the operators in something like RapidMiner, use the operators. They give you way more control than what you get in Turbo Prep.
Right. I think the tough decision for us, and technically as a company, we are almost like a blank slate. We really don't have any legacy decisions or legacy system, so to speak. So we have looked at RapidMiner. We have Ryan is very kind to introduce me to the H2O folks, and we have looked at that. And SageMaker is kind of built into part of the ecosystem, so to speak, and we are still at the very early stage of figuring out what we want to do about the AWS tech stack setup. So we're at the very beginning stage of kind of looking at these platforms and trying to figure out what we can do and want to do. I mean, their pricing, I would say, I mean, RapidMiner, we just look at it, the AI Hub does have a 54,000, something like that price tag, and then you have a 15,000. I think considering that, I haven't made an apples to apples comparison here. I think H2O is not cheap either, right? So, but I think I haven't heard enough about maybe the server side of things, but they all seem to provide definitely similar functionalities. And so for me, the tough decision is that really, yeah, what would be the kind of defining factor in my decision, in our decision to choose which platform to go with? That's a little bit unclear.
For what it's worth, Becky, I'm not the expert on any of these tools, but I would generally recommend focusing on the modeling part. On the data prep side, you have lots of other options, even beyond what we've talked about. If you don't care about the modeling, just doing data prep, there's Power BI, there's Alteryx, there's Nime, which is free, so.
Well, I'll add to that. I would also say not only think about the modeling, but also think about the deployment. How do you productionize it? How easy is it? So you saw me do it. I think the way I did it, it's not difficult, but it's kind of clunky, right? You got to go in through this web interface sort of thing, and you got to configure some things, et cetera, et cetera. It would be nice if you could do all of that from the RapidMiner IDE itself, for example, right? And not have, basically, because what that introduces is I've now got to go to a system administrator of the RapidMiner server sort of thing and ask them to create me a web instance and all that sort of stuff, right? That to me seems clunky and introduces delays and potential for errors and all that sort of stuff. So I would think about that as well. How easy is it to do to do the web services deployment? Also, the one thing that I didn't really touch on here, which I think, let me bring it up really quickly, is worth discussing, is how easy is it for you to expose that data in things like Grafana, or some sort of a dashboard. Again, there's lots of dashboards, but how well integrated? I don't have access. So I'm not going to be able to log in. How easy is it for you to integrate in the results of your ML, right, into dashboards and into things? So that's more, these are more production considerations than just modeling considerations.
Yeah, I think that side of the decision stuff is also super critical too. Yeah, so we still have a long way to go.
The organizations that, Becky, that I've seen be successful are the ones where they make the data easily available to everyone within the organization, right? To be able to access the data, slice it and dice it any way that they want, kind of thing.
And we're still not at that step. So that's a long way to go.
It's a journey. It's a journey. That's fine.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for this introduction. Very end-to-end and very comprehensive.
I'm glad that was the intent.
If you'd like to get an idea about the functionality on the AWS SageMaker side, their repos for the Jupyter notebooks are publicly available, and it gives a good idea about, they're all examples, business examples and some data prep examples if you're going through the notebooks. So you can get a good idea end to end how they would work and what is necessary on the user side to build those notebooks in terms of connecting to the infrastructure for the input, the ETL, and also initializing the endpoint, making those things deployable. So if you have a free account, you can go through to the SageMaker console and look at the examples there, or just go to their Git repo and.
Gotcha.
So Deanna, is it something like this? What I just did is I just came over to RapidMiner server and I just started up the Jupyter Hub for the notebooks. And so basically what they do is they're using a Python API to be able to manipulate RapidMiner, the RapidMiner server, right? So is SageMaker kind of the same when we talk about the notebook?
Yeah, pretty much. They have a bunch of sample notebooks that you can open within their Jupyter repo. I'll find the link and I'll share it. But pretty much similar.
Well, with that, we're at 2:10, guys. And I know you guys have your collaboration at 2:15. So you probably want to push that a bit, but I'm going to stop sharing unless anybody has any questions that they want me to specifically answer.
All right. Thank you, Stephen.
You're absolutely welcome.
And then as I'm want to do and talk about future sessions. So Deanna, can we